If you're looking for the cheapest S&P 500 index fund on the planet, this video is for you. In this video, we're going to talk about FNILX. And for those of you that are not familiar with what FNILX is, it's the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. And not to burst your bubble, this fund isn't an actual S&P 500 index fund. It sort of is, but it sort of isn't. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'll explain it in this video. As I've been browsing the internet on various forums and different websites, I'm hearing a lot of chatter of FNILX, and a lot of people are wondering whether or not FNILX is a legitimate replacement to an actual S&P 500 index fund. And it sort of is, and it sort of isn't. Just like any other investment, it has its pros and it has its cons, but don't worry, we will talk about everything in this video. And before we continue, please don't forget to hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, this is the homepage for FNILX, the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. It's a large cap blend. It has an inception date of September 13th, 2018. It has an expense ratio of a whopping 0%. Just kidding, that's free. And portfolio net assets currently stand at a little over $5.3 billion. And the fund seeks to provide investment results that correspond to the total return of stocks of large capitalization US companies. And the reason that this fund has been getting so much attention and creating so much controversy is because it doesn't use the S&P 500 index. Instead, it uses Fidelity's own proprietary index. As you can see here, the fund is investing at least 80% of assets in common stocks of large capitalization companies included in the Fidelity US Large Cap Index. So unlike FXAIX, which is Fidelity's branded S&P 500 index fund, this fund tracks the Fidelity US Large Cap Index, which is very similar to an S&P 500 index fund, but it's not quite an S&P 500 index fund. But because this fund doesn't use the S&P 500, Fidelity is able to offer it for a 0% expense ratio. So if I'm Vanguard, Schwab, or Fidelity and I want to create an S&P 500 index fund, I have to pay a licensing fee to use that index. Nothing in this world is free. But Fidelity has circumvented that whole process and created their own index, which almost mirrors the S&P 500 index identically. Now you might be thinking, if Fidelity is offering this fund for a 0% expense ratio, how in the world do they make money? And that's a great question. I kind of look at this fund like the Costco hot dog. For decades, Costco has not made any money on their hot dogs, but it's a loss leader. It's been $1.50 since the 70s, and it gets people in the door, and once people are in the door, they're buying other things, and they're buying big ticket items. Similarly, this fund is also a loss leader. It brings people into the Fidelity ecosystem, and once they're in the Fidelity ecosystem, they're gonna be buying other products. Or at least that's the hope. But seriously, if someone goes through the process of signing up for a Fidelity account just to buy FNILX, the chances of them staying on the Fidelity platform to purchase other products that Fidelity offers greatly increases. So that's sort of the way that I look at FNILX. Just think of a Costco hot dog. So that was my unique overview of the fund. Now let's talk about the pros of this fund. The first pro of this fund is that it has an expense ratio of 0%. I mean, we are living in a world where low-cost index funds are readily available, but the fact that Fidelity is offering an index fund with an expense ratio of 0 is incredible. The second pro of this fund is that its performance is almost identical to an S&P 500 index fund. And this is because of the methodology that Fidelity is using. Fidelity's methodology is very, very similar to an S&P 500 index. But let's go ahead and compare the performance to show you guys what I'm talking about. The Fidelity Zero Large Cap Fund is the blue line, and the traditional Fidelity S&P 500 Index, FXAIX, is the yellow line. 1 year performance, Fidelity Zero is down 13.5%, and FXAIX is down 12.2%. Year to date, the Fidelity Zero Fund is down 18.03%, and the Fidelity 500 Index is down 17.71%. In terms of 6-month performance, the Fidelity Zero is only down 7.27%, and the Fidelity 500 Index is down 7.69%. And in terms of 1-month performance, the Fidelity Zero Fund is down 8.43%, and the Fidelity 500 Index is down 8.34%. So for certain time periods, the Fidelity Zero Fund actually performed better, and for other time periods, it actually performed worse. As you can see, the performance is similar, but it's not identical, and we will jump into this later, because it's definitely something that I want to talk about, and it's definitely something that you should consider. The third pro of this fund is that it has similar holdings to an S&P 500 index fund. So here I have FNILX on the left-hand side, and I have FXAIX, which is Fidelity's 500 index fund, on the right-hand side. So free versus really cheap. And with FNILX, the top 10 holdings make up 27.56% of the portfolio. And with FXAIX, the top 10 holdings make up 28.18% of the portfolio. And as you can see, the holdings are exactly the same with some slightly different weightings. The fourth pro of this fund, which kind of goes without saying, is that it's offered by Fidelity. Personally, the fact that Fidelity is offering this fund really gives me a lot of confidence. I guess what I'm trying to say is Fidelity's been around forever. They're trusted. They have billions of dollars on their platform. So the fact that they're offering this fund and not some up and newcomer is a big, big plus for me. And the fifth pro of this fund, which often goes overlooked, is that it has a $0 investment minimum. And as you can see here, the minimum to invest is $0. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because Vanguard mutual funds actually have a minimum to invest of $3,000. So if you were to invest in VFIAX, which is Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund, if you don't have $3,000, you can't invest in that mutual fund. Okay, so we talked about the pros of this fund. Now let's talk about the cons and the things that you should consider. The first first con in consideration is that the returns could negate the cost of the savings. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, this fund has a 0% expense ratio, but it's not like S&P 500 index funds are really all that expensive. I mean, Fidelity's own S&P 500 index fund, which is a branded S&P 500 index fund, has an expense ratio of 0.015%, which is almost free. You can clearly see what I'm talking about. The Fidelity fund is down negative 18.3%, while the Fidelity 500 index fund is down 17.71%. So even when you factor in the Fidelity's 0.015 expense ratio, it still comes out on top. And it comes out on top pretty handily. But as you saw, there were other time periods where the Zero fund actually outperformed the S&P 500 index fund, so that is something that you need to consider. The second thing that you need to consider is that it's not an S&P 500 branded index fund. As I kind of touched on earlier in this video, you're going to be investing in an index fund that uses Fidelity's own proprietary index. So if you absolutely want an S&P 500 index fund, this fund is close, but it's not an S&P 500 index fund. The third con or consideration that you should make is that this fund is not worth transferring into if you're already invested in other mutual funds. So for instance, let's say that you're currently invested in Fidelity's actual S&P 500 index fund, and you now want to invest in this new Fidelity Zero expense ratio fund. It's not worth it. In most cases, when you sell your traditional S&P 500 index fund holdings, you're going to have to pay tax on those holdings as a capital gains tax. And that, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, negates the actual benefit of having a 0% expense ratio. So if you're already invested in other S&P 500 index funds, don't bother transferring that money into this fund. But with that said, if you're just starting your investment journey, I would strongly consider FNILX. Or if you're opening a new account at Fidelity, I would also strongly consider FNILX. The fourth con or consideration of this fund is that there's not enough performance history. Now, for me, there is enough performance history, but for you, there may not be. You see, many of these legacy funds from Fidelity, from Schwab, or from Vanguard have decades and decades of performance that you can look at. But since this fund was just started in 2018, for many of you, that may not be enough performance data. So that's another thing that you should consider, and that's purely subjective whether or not you are comfortable with that. The fifth con or consideration that you should make is what happens if Fidelity cancels their index business. And this is something that I don't really see brought up a lot, but we all know that businesses and the economy are cyclical, and what happens if Fidelity decides to cancel their index business? Do they continue supporting these funds, or do they just shut them down altogether? I do think that the chances of this happening are slim to none, but I do think that it's a consideration that you should make, and a legitimate consideration. The sixth con or consideration of this fund is that it's not an ETF. Now, I personally love ETFs, but not everyone does. I personally love ETFs because I can buy them on any brokerage platform, I can transfer them between brokers, but with this fund, you're kind of stuck on the Fidelity platform. So again, it's not a big deal, but it's definitely something that you should consider. Now let's go into the fourth part of this video where I'll share my final thoughts. All in all, I do think FNILX is a great product. I mean, there's nowhere else that you can get a 0% expense ratio S&P 500 index fund, well, sort of an S&P 500 index fund, but to be honest, it's just not for me. But just because it's not right for me doesn't mean it's not right for you, and that's why I made this video. I try to talk about the pros and the cons so that you can make a decision as to whether or not this fund is right for you. Now, if someone off the street came up to me and said, "Hey Ravi, is FNILX a good fund and should I invest in it?" I would say absolutely. But I would also fill them in on the things that they should consider, because I'm personally happy with VOO. And for those of you that don't know what VOO is, it's Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund ETF. And as I mentioned, I love investing in ETFs. And I also like using traditional brokerage platforms like TD Ameritrade, M1 Finance, Robinhood, yada, yada, yada. I don't really like to be glued down to one platform, and with FNILX, you are glued down to the Fidelity platform. I know I'm kind of going back and forth here, but all in all, I do think FNILX is a great product. So if you're new to investing, or if you're looking to open a Fidelity account, I do think FNILX deserves your consideration. But for me, I just like my classic S&P 500 index funds. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys got value from this video, and if you did, please remember to like this video for the YouTube algorithm, and please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time.